Is this yours, Keith? This is yours. Are you going to preach? Here you go. Here. There it is, look. You're welcome. Well, good evening. I'm not going to ask you if you're good, because Jesus says you're not. So, that's the way it is, I'm afraid. He says there's none good. But we do our best, don't we? We do. We're only good through Him. Have you ever noticed that, you know, whenever you see a sign that says wet paint, have you ever touched the paint? I've done it as well. You touch the paint, just see if it's dry. It's a wee bit tacky still, you know. But have you ever noticed if you see a sign that says danger 10,000 volts, you tend not to touch it? Isn't that right? I haven't done it. Maybe somebody's forgot to switch it on, so maybe I'll give it a wee try and see. Poof! A wee pale of ashes. It was on after all. That's what happened to you, 10,000 volts. You know that we're told sometimes, we're told things all of the time, should I say. And we listen to stuff, but we don't always take heed of what we hear. And it seems to me that the level of danger might determine how much attention we pay. You know, the wet paint, 10,000 volts. You pay attention. So the level of danger determines how much heed we pay to what we're looking at or hearing. With the paint, I might get a coloured fingertip. But with the 10,000 volts, I'll get fried. That's not great. So, to try and determine how much attention you're paying tonight and how much heed you're taking, I've come up with an experiment. Okay, now in here, this is a very dangerous liquid. This is called Dihydrogene Monoxide, or another name for it is hydroxyl acid. And it's very, very corrosive. It can scald your skin. It can burn the skin off. If it's inhaled, you can die from inhaling it. It brings death from inhalation. Now, why did I bring this here tonight? Because they're all safe, because there's a wee cap on it. So there is. At the minute, there is. Now, you won't die just from taking a wee quick sniff, all right? So it's not lethal that way, but it's very corrosive. It erodes our very landscape on us, corrodes metals. And as I say, if you inhale it, it brings death. So it's very dangerous. So what I'm going to do is, before I take it out of the wee veil here, I'm going to put my wee gloves on, because I don't want to get a scald. I know you don't care, but no, I'm not got my thumb and my wee finger. That's the right hand one out. Now, I'm going to put this on just for a quick jobby. Now, I'm going to put some of this into a bit of water, because if I dilute it, it loses a wee bit of its strength. Now, watch, right? Have to be careful here. Don't drop it on the floor. Okay. There we go. Put this back on. Now, put the lid back on this, and the dangerous part's all over. Because it reacts a wee bit with the plastic as well, so I want to see just what happens. So, anyway, and while that's cooking, and trying to get my glasses, or these glasses off, trying to get these gloves off, starts with G anyway, so it does. Sometimes, isn't there that many substances in the earth? Like, there are ones that are completely lethal. Like, I mean, the minute you flip and touch it, it's gone. You're gone. But don't you wonder sometimes, why did God create these things? Why did he create them? I can't get them off. My rubber hands now. So you ask yourself, why does God create such a stuff? And if I just left it at that, well, and if you've taken heed of what just happened, okay? So hopefully you've taken heed and you've took some of that in, and you've taken heed so far, but then you probably know that you wouldn't go near this stuff, would you? You wouldn't keep that in the house in case the kids drank it, because it's clear. Like, you know, it looks safe enough. So you would lock it up and keep it out of the way, keep it out of harm's way. And you would never think of drinking it. So, have you all been paying attention? You seen what happened? Did you watch everything that happened? Good. Good. So let me ask you a question then. Okay. It's on a different subject, but it's a question all the same. Does anybody know how roughly the length of time a human can live without food? Just without eating? Any guesses?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? What's that, 21 days? No? 3 months, 90 days, probably a wee bit too long. Yeah, 60. It's between 43 and 60 days, or 70 days, sorry. It's between 43 and 70, and that's really down to the level of fitness that you have at the time. If you're very frail and whatever, you may have only lost about a week, but generally speaking, you'll go between 43 and 70 days. They used to do a lot of studies on it, but they no longer do that because it's inhumane to do that now. But the hunger strikers actually helped them quite a bit, because they've done a lot of studying while they're... No, seriously, I'm not being funny, I'm serious. They actually, science learned a lot at the time that the boys were hunger striking, because they learned a lot about hunger and starvation. And it is funny, but it's true at the same time. But what about without food and water? What's the difference? How long can a person live without food and water? Well, it's between 8 and 21 days. And serious side effects start to kick in after about 3 days. Again, it all depends on your own level of fitness and health. And I can probably last longer, because I'm like a camel. I have plenty of it all built up inside. So I'll set that the right away. You've all seen the cowboy movies. You remember, you've ever seen John Wayne? John Wayne he's walking through a desert, and they're all walking through a desert, and they all die, one after the other. There's no water. And John's standing, and he's trying to squeeze the last drop of water out of his canteen, his wee bottle of it, and it's metal. But they're trying to squeeze that wee bit of water, and a drip, because that keeps him going for a bit of fortnight till he gets to some town somewhere. So it does. It's amazing. But you've seen them, so you have. So you do get thirsty and a wee bit parched. So well, here. The experiment worked. You have just proved that. Thank God for that. Because from your reactions when I lifted the bottle, I could see that some of you had actually taken heed of what I'd done. You'd watched everything, hadn't you? Some of you didn't care, because some of you says just get it in there. And some of you may just wanted to see that I grow another head or anything like that when I drank it. But actually, no, it's okay. This is all right. Because see, after 21 days, you would drink anything. So you would. Water's good. Water dilutes. Didn't I say that? I've hidden it away. Well, the truth is, and some of you might know this, that dihydrogene monoxide, which is better known as hydroxyl acid, is really well known as water. But it does do all the things I said it does. Because it doesn't do any good inhaling it if you're laying at the bottom of a pool. And when it gets turned to steam, it can do quite a bit of damage. But yet, we can't live without it. Life depends on it. No water, no life. That's the truth. So that's why God had this lovely chemical on this planet to keep us all alive. So it's nice to see you've all been paying attention so far. Well, most of you. Anyway, on Sunday, Roy told us that the bride, which is us, said, "Kiss me, draw me, and tell me." Yeah? Tell me. And when he said tell me, I thought, well, okay, I had this in mind, what I'm talking about is working this. I thought, tell me is interesting, isn't it? It's got me thinking, you see, that when you ask someone to tell you something, there's two things that come to mind. There's like two expectations, isn't there? Like, if I ask somebody to tell me something, I'm expecting them to speak. Yeah? And likewise, they're expecting me to listen. So there's two things that are expect. When I ask you to talk to me, I'm hoping that you're going to speak to me. If you don't, there's something wrong. Maybe fell out with me. But when you come to speak to me, when you're going to speak after I've asked you that, you're really thinking, he must be going to listen to me. He must want to take in what I say. And it's very ignorant of me not to. If I say, tell me something, and then you go to tell me and I walk off. That's not the way it works. Simon and Garfunkel, they sang a song, The Boxer. I'm sure some of you know it. And in it there's a line that the man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And today we have a fancy term for this, and we call it selective hearing. And selective hearing is when we focus our attention on the bits that we like, or the wee bits that scratch where we itch, the bits that we feel is important to us, and the rest goes in one ear and out the other. That's selective hearing. And we can do it consciously, that is, we're aware that we're doing it, because you just don't want to listen. And then there's subconsciously when we're not aware of it. And I'm not sure which one's the worst of the two, but the point is that the person you're speaking to is generally aware of it. They're generally aware. To me, what did I just say there? And we, as men, we go in our heads. And you see, the truth is, guys, you've got like about a split second, you have a half a second to work this out. So you really have to be quick, or just forget it. I've learned over the years just to say, I wasn't listening. I was away somewhere. I was traveling around the world in my head. So, I've learned to say that because it's easier. Because after 1 second, she's going to say to you, see, you weren't listening. And that's it. You were beat. So selective hearing can be bad. I have to admit that I always, when I've heard selective hearing explained to me sometimes, I get this, I've always taken it as a negative connotation on it. That I'm just listening to the bits that I like using selective hearing. And it becomes a negative thing. So we use it to say, you're just using your selective hearing. You're only hearing what you want to hear and disregarding the rest. But the thing is that we're very good at it. Humans are very good at it. And it is a good thing when it's used properly. And it's meant to be used to help us to focus on something that we're listening to, or someone when they're saying something to us or speaking to us. And we use it automatically in situations in crowded rooms or areas where there's sort of a lot of background noise, and our brains are very good at filtering out the background noise so that we can focus on the person that we're speaking with. So our brains are built to do that. So when it's used properly, it's a good thing. But unfortunately, we don't always get it right. Who knows that we can be good at listening, but not really so good at hearing what's being said, not so good at paying attention and paying heed. In other words, we can listen to a lot of stuff, but we're not always taking heed of what is being said and what we're hearing. So how's your hearing? I thought tonight we might do a bit of a hearing checkup. And it's not that we don't have ears, guys. We have ears. It's just that sometimes we don't use them properly. The Bible places great importance on hearing God's voice. The great command comes from God through Moses, and it begins like this. Deuteronomy 6:4. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Hear, O Israel. So right away, he's saying, hear. And this is just not a hear, but this is a take heed. Take heed, people. Our God, the Lord is one. Proverbs 8:33-34 says, "Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it." Do not neglect what you hear. "Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates and waiting beside my doors." And I love that wee picture. Isn't that lovely? You're blessed is the one who is listening, watching, and waiting. Listening, watching, and waiting. You're blessed. God says, if you're doing that for me, I'm going to bless you. Jesus urges us to listen and to use our selective hearing in a positive way. And he says in John 10:3-5, it says, "The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." I have a lovely image in my head when I'm talking about this, because when I was in Portugal years ago, we were just sitting around a fire. We were staying at a big church over there doing some work, and there was a field at the front of it, and this wee shepherd would just walk past. He would walk through the field, and the sheep would just follow him. And it works like that. It's not like the dog and all the rest of it, you know. He was just walking, and he had a staff. He walked, 10, maybe 15 feet, and he would just stand and lean on the staff, and the sheep would follow him. And they'd all munch away at the grass, munchy, munchy, munch, munch. And then he would take another wee 15 feet or so and stop again. The sheep would all munch, 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 munch. So they'd be mowing the lawn for you. But they would follow him. They didn't go in front of him. They stopped. And then when he moved forward, they followed. And I thought, that's an incredible picture of just what he's saying here. And you run away from strangers because you know their voice. He was saying something to them, but it was Portuguese. I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. He could have been asking him what time it is. I wouldn't have knew. But we've been given this amazing ability to recognize voices. I mean, we've all been in the shopping mall, haven't we, or somewhere crowded, and you hear a voice. And you go, "Oh, I know that voice." And you start looking around for who was that, and then you start thinking, "I know who that was. That's Big John. I know his voice." So you know people's voices. So we have this ability to recognize voices. Jesus knows this. And it's a precious and encouraging statement in that verse, whenever he says, and you take heed of it, what he says, we will recognize his voice and we will follow him. We won't follow strangers because we won't recognize their voices, because we don't know them. His sheep recognize his voice. And when you think about it, Jesus says this quite a bit. He who has ears, let him hear. And you see it in Revelations 2 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 when he's talking to the churches. He says it to every one of the churches. He who has an ear, let him hear. Now, our ears are not like our eyes. Our ears do not have lids. Our eyes have lids. So we can close our eyes. If I don't want to see something, well, we can close our eyes, we shut them. And if it's a really scary thing, you put a cushion in front of you as well, because it means just in case your lids aren't working, you still can't see it because you're really frightened. But we can close our lids. And we normally close them when we're going to sleep. Don't we? That's how we rest. We close our eyes. But the thing is, what normally wakens us in the night is noise. We all set alarms because the noise wakens us, because our ears are open. Yeah, so normally it's noise that wakens us. Except, of course, when your wife's been eaten by a dog and then senior kicks you to death because you think somebody's trying to eat her toes. I was awakened that night and it was not by a noise. It was a terrible kicking I was getting. But we hear all the time, and that's because our ears are intended to remain open. If God intended us to be able to close them, He would have given us earlids as well as our eyelids. So how long's it been since you had your hearing checked? And I'm not talking about, going to a doctor's or the clinic. I'm talking about a wee spiritual checkup. Because our hearing is important. And what we listen to and pay attention to and take heed of, all of that can determine who we become. So it's important to hear the right things. And Jesus knew how important it is. And remember, Romans says that faith comes from what? From hearing. And as I said, we often find Jesus saying, "He who has ears, let him hear." During his earthly ministry here in Matthew 11:15, he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. In 13:9, he says, "He who has ears, let him hear." In 13:43, he says, "Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." And again in Mark, he says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." And we've already said in his letter, or when he was speaking in Revelations, he says it several times. And we think, well, what is he saying? What is the point? And the point is that Jesus is about to say something important. In fact, I think anything that Jesus is going to say is important. I'm not really interested in football. See, if Jesus wanted to be talking about football today, I would listen to him all day about football. So, because I just want to hear his voice, and I don't care what he's talking about. But anything he's going to say is important. But he's saying here particularly, he's making this statement because I want you to pay particular attention to what I'm going to say. You have ears to hear, so hear, take heed, pay attention, listen up. Mark 4:23-25 says, "If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." And he said to them, "Pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured back to you, and still more will be added to you. For the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." So pay attention. If you want to keep what Jesus says to you, pay attention, take heed of it, hold it and guard it close, and more will be added to that. And here's a very important one. Revelation 3:20. Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and eat with him and he with me." You see, everybody will hear the knock at the door. But the one who hears his voice, they open the door. You go, well, now wait a minute. So, that's a knock at the door. I don't hear a voice. So that tells me Jesus must be going to say something as well. He may just say, "Are you in? Is there anybody there? Alan?" So I hear his voice now. And I hear his voice. I go, wait a minute. I know that voice. That's Jesus. He said, open the door. That's Jesus. You get a wee bit like Elf. Santa, I know him. No, Jesus, I know him. Open the door. And that's what he's talking about. You hear his voice. You get excited and you open the door. It's important that we know his voice. So when you hear it, you can act. And another point that we can pick out of that is that the problem that Jesus was talking about back then is still around today. So what existed then still exists today. That is that many people simply do not hear so as to understand. They don't really actually listen to what's being said. So it was 2,000 years ago, here we are today, and the same things are going on. I think sometimes many of us, including myself, don't really appreciate the importance of paying attention. And is it just wet paint, or is it 10,000 volts? How important is it, what we're listening to? Hearing to understand is really important, and good listening concerned Jesus, as we've seen. He wanted his listeners to pay close attention to what he said. So I think it's a fair question, isn't it, to ask yourself, well, how well do I hear? How good is my listening? Have you ever noticed, or maybe should I say, have you ever considered that in a conversation, sometimes in your head, I sit and do it because it's just the way I'm wired, right? I sit and if you sit and you're in a conversation, someone's talking, and you really think about it, you're actually thinking sometimes what you're going to say. So you're preparing what your next sentence is going to be, what you're going to say, while you're speaking. And so when you're doing that there, you're not really listening. You've lost it. So what they were saying is gone, because you're thinking about what you're going to chip in next. And you're not really paying attention to what's being said. And so the voice in our head can drown out what's being said. Our attention wanders off somewhere. And by the time we tune in again, we've lost the thread of the conversation. When I was in Africa with Andrew, that was about 6 years ago, Andrew, wasn't it? And I remember with the local guys over in Africa, when 6 o'clock, somebody switches the light off. It just goes from light to dark. And when it goes dark, the guys, they prepare anyway, fires and things. We used to sit around the fire at night. We used to sit around the fire and we'd be sitting until the wee hours of the morning. It was great. So it was, and you would have general conversation was going on. But when someone was actually speaking about something and were trying to make a point about something, basically they had this thing where they would cast a stone, they called it. And and so if you wanted to say something, rather than interrupt when this person's explaining something, rather than interrupt, you would do what they call cast a stone. And that meant that you would cast a stone, then you would wait till they finished, and then you would have your say. You would be given your say next in line. And I thought it was a great way of dealing with things, where a lot of time we try and talk over each other, so we do, and jump in on each other. And somebody's maybe trying to explain something that they feel is important, and the next thing, you've jumped in with, I remember that. So throw a stone, not at their head, cast a stone. The Bible refers to different types of hearers. It says that there are those that are hard of hearing. Matthew 13:13-15 says, "This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah, which is from Isaiah 6:9-10, is fulfilled. He says, you will indeed hear, but never understand, and you will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear." And I think that's very relevant for today, because it's hard to get through to people. People have this idea. I suppose it's always been a bit like that, but with the gospel, if you go and you start talking to people about it and try to bring Jesus into a conversation, and people just don't want to know. They're hard of hearing. There's those that are dull of hearing. It says in Hebrews 5:11, "About this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing." So when you become dull of hearing, it says things are hard to explain. No matter how much you break things down, or no matter how horsey-ducky you get with what you're trying to explain, some people just don't get it. And it's not because they're stupid, but it can mostly be because they're sort of happy where they're at. People get to a place where I don't want to know anymore, I don't want to learn anymore, I know what I'm doing and I'm happy where I am. I don't want to be pushed anymore. And so people just take this back seat and decide, this is where I'm stopping. Hebrews 5 and 12 in the very next verse says, For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. That's those who are dull of hearing. Then there's those with itching ears. 2 Timothy 4, 3-4 says, For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. Sounds like a 21st century to me. Eh? This is really selective hearing in the negative sense. Yeah. They only have ears for what scratches that itch. And they listen only to teachers that tickle their own passions and their desires, their own likes and their own dislikes. You know, the minute that their own sort of pre-formed truths are challenged, then they're off. They're either off in their heart or just take off altogether the minute that they're challenged. And then Jesus says that there's those with honest and good hearts. Jesus spoke of these in the parable of the sower. In Luke 8:15 he says, As for that in the good soil, they are those who, hearing the word, hold it fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit with patience. Holding on to the word and applying it in their lives, you know, how they speak, how they act, and how they respond to challenges that come their way every day. The Bereans were the hearers of this kind, receiving the word with eagerness. It says in Acts 17:10-11, it says that the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. And now these Jews, it says, were more noble than those in Thessalonica. I don't know about that. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Receiving the word with all eagerness. You know, they were eager, they couldn't wait, they wanted more. And they were searching daily. And I love that word there. It says that they were examining the scriptures. You know, I get this picture of somebody with a magnifying glass, you know, sitting, scribbling down and going at it, you know, just turn into the word to see and see what they can get out of it. Chasing down every word. And that's paying attention, isn't it? Get the magnifying glass out and get into the Bible. Jesus says people like this have honest and good hearts. Hearts that are chasing down every word. He says in Matthew that we cannot live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. And you know, God's not about to run out of words. You know, He has not used all His words up. Evie, our granddaughter, when she was smaller, used to sit in the back of the car and she could have talked till I drove down a skill and back again. She'd just tick, 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 tick. And to get a bit of peace and quiet, sometimes we'd shout out and tell her, Evie, you need to stop talking for a while because you're going to use all your words up and you'll not have any left. And then she would look at you like, you two idiots. But God is still speaking today. Thank God He's still speaking today. And He'll speak on into eternity. And you know what's really good? We're going to be listening. We're going to be listening, especially when we get there. It's important to us to hone our hearing and listening skills. If Jesus thought it was important, then it's important, isn't it? If He thought it was important, it must be. There's no ifs or buts about it. He says in Matthew 13:16-17, But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. When our eyes see and our ears hear, they're blessed. We're blessed. And He says many of the prophets long to see and hear what we do. Sometimes I listen to people who hearken back to the past. Oh, I love to have been about when the disciples were about and Jesus was about, and the olden days, you know. And I always think, you know, if you're from Northern Ireland and you think you wish you had been about 2,000 years ago, the likelihood is you would have been in Northern Ireland. You probably wouldn't have knew who Jesus was or ever heard of Him. Sad, isn't it? But now we hear Him. Today we hear of Him. Today we know Him. Don't know about the past. I'm happy about listening and learning about the past, but I'm very happy to move on into the future with God, who thinks of the future all the time and has a future planned out for all of us. And the prophets, they long to see that. They long for that. When we listen to him, we hear his words, we learn to understand the blessings that we have in him. Our faith is built up. Why? Because faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So it's not just any hearing. It comes through hearing, but not any hearing, but through the word. Hearing that is filtered by Christ's word. The filtered hearing. That's what builds up strength in our faith. No other hearing does that. You've all heard the story, I'm sure. You know the build your house in the rock story, the wise man, the foolish man. Luke 6:46 to 49. It starts with this. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he's like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation in rock, and when the flood rose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation, and when the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. And we talk about the wise man and the foolish man, and how wise it is to build your house on the rock. But ask yourself this question, just digging a wee bit deeper. What made the wise man wise and the foolish man foolish? You see, when you really look at it, you see, it's the word of Christ is the rock. It's really about the benefits. This is really about the benefits of hearing and obeying. Are you paying attention? This is about the benefits of hearing and obeying. Because Jesus starts off by asking that question, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? So he makes it clear what he's speaking about. And he says, anyone who comes to me and hears my word and does them, I will show you what he's like. This is what you're like if you listen to his word and you do them. So what made the wise man wise? Hearing and listening to his word, paying attention and taking heed, and also applying what he had heard to his life. He says, when you come to him, hear his words and do them, you will be like the wise man, for you will have prepared a good foundation. The foolish man still heard the words. He had ears to hear, without lids, just like yours and mine. But he didn't use them to hear. He only heard a noise. He didn't pay attention. And he didn't apply what he heard. So the simple difference was this. The wise man heard and acted. The foolish man heard and done nothing. Jesus expects, like I was saying earlier, when somebody says, tell me something, you expect something. Jesus expects that if you're calling him Lord, then you will do what he asks. You will do what he asks, and you will apply his principles to your life. And the bottom line is that simply doing what he asks is wisdom. Listening to him keeps us grounded on a firm foundation. Hebrews 2:1 says, therefore we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. Drift away from what we've heard. It doesn't say fall away, it just says drift away from what we've heard. And we can all drift from time to time. But what's important is, as we drift, we keep an ear out. We listen for that voice, because he will be calling. We're listening out for that wee voice that we recognize. And he's going to be calling. But what the verse is really telling us is this. If we pay close attention to what we hear, well, that in itself is going to stop us from drifting. Yeah. That's going to help us to not drift, to prevent us from drifting. So paying close attention keeps us in firm ground. Here's a question to ask yourself when you come to hear God's word, or you sit down to read his word. Does God's word deserve my closest attention? Does God's word deserve your closest attention, your full attention? Now, your answer to that question is going to determine your level of hearing. I don't want to know your answer, because that's between you and him. And I'm not going to tell you my answer. But what I can tell you is that the Bible is God's Word. It is the voice of God to us. And reading it and applying it in our lives, it will change us. It'll change who we are. It'll change where we're going. I wasn't going to a nice place before I met him. But if you only lift it now and again to get wee snippets from it, well then you're going to miss out on the big picture. I mean, do you take a wee bit from the start and a wee bit from the middle and a wee bit from the end of any book and then feel that you fully understand that book? You have to read the book. So it's no good dipping and diving into it. You need to read it. If you come to listen to someone up here, then pay attention and listen all the way through. If I say something that throws you a bit, which I might do from time to time, then just make a quick note of it and carry on listening. Because you see, what happens is you go off around the world for a shortcut in your head, trying to work out what was, I agree with that, then I agree with that, and things might have actually cleared up while you were sort of moving across the great plains of Africa in your head, coming home again. And while you were there, things have cleared up, but you're not aware of it. Because why? Because you've stopped listening. You've stopped listening, and you've started thinking about what you think. I suppose what I'm saying is this, guys. Make hearing as much an act of worship as singing or speaking or praying, or any other act of worship you can't think of. Hearing is an act of worship. It is an act of worship, guys. When Jesus is talking, it's an act of worship to listen. Hear with a mind to act, just like the wise man in the story who heard and acted. James puts it like this. This is my penultimate scripture. James 1:22-25. He says, "But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he is like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing." He's saying there, you look at yourself in the mirror, and he's equating that with hearing. He's saying, people hear things, and you've no sooner got out that door till you forgot a lot of what you've heard. So he's saying, like the guy looked in the mirror and forgot what he looked like after, when he went out the door. You can hear a lot of stuff and forget a lot of what you heard as you leave. I love James. I like James because James is he's like a what you see is what you get type of person, isn't he? He just says it like it is. There's no holds barred. He says if you're only hearers of the word and not doers, you're deceiving yourselves. I didn't say it, he did. You're deceiving yourselves. You're not deceiving anyone else, just yourself. Of course, we can all see anyway, so we can. What's happening? You've looked in the mirror and before you leave the room, you forgot what you look like. I know sometimes I get up from one room and go into another room and then forget what I went in for, but I think that's an age thing. Just getting older. He says that the doer will be blessed. Just as Jesus said, it was the guy who acted on his word that was blessed with a firm foundation. He who has an ear, let him hear. And finish with this. God the Father spoke these words in Luke 9:35. It says that a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And if God thinks it's important to listen to Jesus, then it's important that we listen to Jesus. The voice of Jesus is the key to our future, guys, and it is our obedience to that voice that releases God to fulfill his promises in our lives. That hopefully come up there. The voice of Jesus is the key to our future. So listen to him. Thank you. No, look at the money. Get out of here. your way. Get cramp in my leg.